Hello everyone, my name is Tamaya and welcome to my library. So today I'm going to be doing a review / discussion about The Vanishing Half by Brit Bennett. I talked a little bit about it in my top 5 favorite books by Black women authors, but I wanted to give it its own dedicated video, give a review, talk about the technical things, but I also, with my reviews, I want to integrate discussions about the broader things that the book talks about. And so today we're not only going to be reviewing the book, talking about who I would recommend it for, but also we're going to be talking about a specific theme that stuck out to me, and that's the intergenerational nature of colorism, sexism, racism, etc., and how we can sort of counteract that. If you see me looking over here, it's because I have like my viewfinder like through my computer, and then also my notes over there, so I'm gonna glance back and forth, but yeah. So for a synopsis, if you don't know already, The Vanishing Half is about two twins, Stella and Desiree Vigne. I don't really know how to say their last name. They're from Louisiana. But both of them leave their town called Mallard, which is a town in Louisiana where everyone is Black, but they're all so fair-skinned that they could pass for white. Most people don't intentionally pass. Some do, like here and there, like kind of walk the color line sort of thing. And Stella and Desiree, when they get out of the town, they're tired of the small town life, all of that, and so they leave and go to New York, I believe. Yeah, I think at first they go to New York or somewhere. They leave, basically. And so for a while, they're living together in the city. They both have jobs, whatever. And Stella ends up deciding to pass full time. So at first she does it just to get a better job so that her and Desiree can sort of have a better life. But then she ends up kind of getting comfortable, falls in love, and lives full time as a white woman and completely cuts off ties with Desiree. On the flip side, Desiree, after Stella leaves, kind of just goes about her life, hoping that she'll come back, but kind of comes to the exception that she never will. And she ends up marrying a Black man, like very dark-skinned, as you know they describe in the book, versus Stella marries a white man. Both of them have daughters who are Jude and Kennedy, respectively. And so we basically are following everyone's lives from the 50s, when Stella and Desiree are like in their early teens and they first run away, to the 90s when Jude and Kennedy are like grown women. Like I think they end up in like their early 30s or something. And their lives sort of like interweave. They sort of meet each other and collide in like very different ways. And bless you. You're fine. And overall, it was just really good, very interesting. As far as rating, I gave it a 4.5 out of 5, I think. Either 4.5 or 5. I don't know. But yeah. And so as far as, so that's the plot description. As far as kind of like the technical things and like why I would recommend it, I think the writing was impeccable. I always love Brit Bennett's writing. I talked about it in my other video too with the mothers. It's kind of like the same thing with that intergenerational story. It goes over the course of a really long time, and sometimes that can get I've seen that not done well in books, and I think that Brit Bennett has mastered doing that very well. And then in regards to the time, it's very immersive and very fluid, but not in a confusing way, but in a way that's, it just keeps you into the story. So like, for example, the sections are split up into parts, and they're by the year and then like some sort of descriptor about like that time. So like part 1, as you can see, is The Lost Twins, starts in 1968. But everything in this part doesn't just happen in 1968, if that makes sense. And it kind of goes throughout the whole story, and so there is that chronological nature of it, but it's not too stuffy, but it's also not confusing when we are kind of blending through time and getting flashbacks and learning people's backstories and things like that. related to that. It was also very easy to get into the story. It's not a super action-packed type of book. I don't necessarily require that in my books, but if that is something that you really look for, like you need something happening every page, this probably wouldn't be the book for you. But I think as far as the things that do happen, it was just a really great look into the characters' lives. I don't think any character was underdeveloped. I don't think that any character felt thrown in just for, you know, some sort of like diversity point or anything like that. I think everyone felt very full-fledged, and I really appreciate that, because I think a lot of authors, when they're trying to sort of make these inclusions of other identities, it just feels like, oh, that's just the gay best friend. Oh, that's just the blah, blah, blah. And there's no real development of that character outside of being somehow related to the main characters. And so I really appreciated that as well. And then in relation to that, I think how Bennett wrote the characters made it very easy to empathize with them. And I think that it's very, very difficult to do that, especially with Stella, because I'm not going to say any spoilers, but a lot of the decisions that she makes on face value just seem grimy, honestly. Like that's really the best way that I can think of it. It's like, girl, like, you're trifling. And it's really easy to kind of get into that and to automatically judge her. But Brit Bennett has a way of writing her and understanding her motivations, and not in like oh, this is my motivation way, but just in a very natural and empathetic tone. And so I really appreciated that as well, because I don't like in stories when it's just so obvious, this is the good person, this is the bad person, and like rah against the bad guy type of thing. It wasn't that sort of energy, and I really appreciated that as well. I think another thing, and this is a very character-driven story, if you can't tell. There's not like a super duper in-depth plot. It's really just all of these women's lives and the people connected to them and how they interweave. But I think that it really raises a lot of questions about how would you really adapt to racism if you were in the position to be able to pass. Like, it's so quick to judge Stella, like, you left your family, you're blah, 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 blah. And I don't even have an answer for myself for like how I would kind of respond in sort of the instances that she was in. But it kind of raises that question of like, if you could benefit from whiteness, and if you could meld between those worlds without any repercussions, you know, unless you get caught, obviously, would you really not? Like, knowing the privilege that comes with whiteness, knowing in the time period that all these people are living, like, and even now, like, come on now, it's not like racism just like disappeared after the 90s. Like, how realistically can you expect that you wouldn't take advantage of that if given the opportunity? And so because it makes you think about that, it kind of helps you be a little more sympathetic to Stella. I hope that makes sense. I don't know. It kind of made me think of that, because it's like, what would I do in that situation? I like to think that I wouldn't, and I don't think that I would, but you don't know until you're at that point where it's like, I can either keep washing these clothes and barely being able to keep a roof over my head, or I can tell these people that I'm white and get this better job and completely change my trajectory. Because that's ultimately what her decision came down to. But once you cross that line, there's no coming back. And that's another like really big thing that's like interweaved throughout the book as well. I keep saying interweaved, and I keep doing this in this. Whatever. So a couple last minute things in the review section, and then we'll get into the discussion. I do want to say that there are definitely trigger warnings for domestic abuse and overt racism and colorism. There is a lot of language that is anti-Black, anti-dark skinned, and I don't think that that's like a fault on the author, because it is a period piece. Sorry, I just got a text. it's not a fault on the author. That is, like, you know, a period piece, realistic, and those were the ideologies and terminologies that were used. But just do keep that in mind. If that is something that is upsetting or uncomfortable for you, this might not be the book for you. I don't think that it was anything that took away from my experience, but just to make sure that you are aware. I was also going to say, if you have ever read Passing by Nella Larsen, that's another really good book that's around these similar themes and more like of a classic. I don't know when it came out, but it's like older. I read it in high school, but that's also a really good one that you might want to read if you are interested in this conversation around passing historically. And so now going into the discussion, I wanted to talk about the generational nature of colorism specifically, but also just bigoted ideals in general. I think that we have a lot of tendencies to, under the guise of respecting your elders and not wanting to disrespect people who have lived more life than us and who've experienced more than us, we have a tendency to allow them to continue to perpetuate negative ideologies and harmful ideologies that build into these generational curses that we have. And so the reason that I'm bringing this up is because in the story, Jude's grandmother, Desiree and Stella's mom, and I don't think this is really a spoiler, it's kind of obvious when you just think about the plot in general, but she's obviously, you know, from Mallard, so she's very light skinned, and they put being light on this pedestal because it's kind of like their sort of protective factor. They've all insulated themselves into this town. They very rarely interact with white people, but this is kind of, they've been able to create this life for themselves with this proximity to whiteness. And so I forget her name, but Jude's grandma is very, very judgmental of Jude's just main existence because she is not light skinned. Jude takes more so after her father, who is very dark, and there's all of these different little comments or like full scenes where she's telling Jude she needs to make sure that she's wearing a hat whenever she goes outside, or she shouldn't be sitting outside, can't go out and play because she shouldn't be in the sun and can't get too dark, telling her that she can't wear light colors because it'll just bring out her dark skin too much, sort of beating her down and beating her down for something that she cannot control, and that it sort of creates that disconnect where it's like, this is my grandmother who's really helping raise me and who's supposed to love me unconditionally, but on the other hand, she acts like she can't even stand looking at me and like doesn't even want me to do the regular things that a child does so that I don't become more undesirable for her. And no one checks her for that. Desiree doesn't check her, even though she, you know, is pretty good about trying to make sure that Jude feels better about herself. Whenever she gets bullied, she's kind of there as that support system, but she never checks her, and it's her daughter. No one in the town does. The only time that Jude ever really finally gets like that acceptance of herself and just that unconditional love for her inner and outer beauty is when she eventually gets with her boyfriend. And so it's like, and that's not until she goes to college. So it was frustrating to read because we always have this tendency, and obviously this is fiction, but it's based on real life and it's real experiences. We have this tendency when, you know, our grandma or our grandpa says something ignorant or says something just disrespectful to some sort of identity that either we have or someone that we care about has, or just any person in the world has, we hold our tongue and don't try to correct them or sort of bring them into a newer or into a higher, like more developed level of consciousness about that issue because they're set in their ways and they're old and blah, 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 blah. No, like that's not okay, because that they can be set in their ways and be old and ornery and whatever, but those ideals that they hold are still impacting the generations below them. Like the grandmother, I wish I remembered her name, whatever. The grandmother, and not to like go on her, but you know, she all of those things that she was ingraining into Jude's mind took her self-esteem. She never even had a chance to develop her self-esteem, because the majority of her childhood and her formative years were her grandmother saying that she can't go outside because she's too dark, and people in the town ostracizing her because of her skin tone. So I can't read that or also see other people's experiences with that and just think, oh well, she's just old and harmless. That's not harmless. And so, and I think that there has to be a better we have to be better about holding older generations, and there's still younger people that are ignorant too, but that's not what we're talking about right now. We have to be more intentional about holding other older generations accountable for those hateful ideals, regardless of how old and set in their ways they are, because it's not fair to anyone to be like berated for simple things within your identity just because the person that it's coming from is your elder. That's not acceptable. And if you think I'm being disrespectful, I don't really care, because it's not acceptable. It's harmful, and it doesn't just like leave with that person once they it doesn't just leave with that person once they ascend, so yeah, I feel like I got a little heated. That's just what I wanted to talk about today. The Vanishing Half, great book. You should definitely read it. It won Book of the Year for a reason. And yes, if you liked this type of review with like talking about the more technical issues and then kind of delving deeper into kind of the type of conversations that it brought up for me when reflecting, definitely let me know down below. Also let me know on just what you think either about this book if you've read it, or what you think about what I talked about today. Do you think I'm right? Do you think I'm wrong? Do you just have something to add? Definitely let me know. That's all I got. Thank you. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you watch all the way to the end, leave a ghost emoji for Vanishing Half. Vanishing. Right? That was good. Okay, bye.